Hello, I'm Jonasz Rawiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Let's dive right in, shall we? The United States, the bastion of unwavering support for allies and, more recently, unpredictable policy shifts, has just hit the pause button on military aid to Ukraine. Now, before you start picturing Ukraine's defense system as a deflating balloon, let's get one thing straight. This isn't an all-out abandonment. It's more like when your friend promises to help move your couch and then shows up with a toolbox instead of a pickup truck. It is not ideal, but it's not a total disaster, at least not yet. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Following the meeting at the White House, which turned into a shouting match, a scenario that many feared has materialized. The US has paused military aid to Ukraine to pressure Kyiv to sit at the negotiating table.
It's time to stop this madness. It's time to halt the killing. It's time to end this senseless war. If you want to end wars, you have to talk to both sides.
And so, a crackdown on ammunition deliveries, vehicles and other military equipment, including shipments agreed to when Joe Biden was president, has been introduced.
Reports coming in from the border and our hub in Rzeszów confirm what the Americans are saying. This puts Europe, Ukraine and Poland in a much tougher spot, but we need to face this situation head-on.
US officials insist this is a pause, not a permanent termination of aid, until President Trump believes Ukraine is ready for good faith peace talks. Something Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says is already the case.
We can only regret what happened at the White House instead of our negotiations. But we must find the strength to move forward, to respect one another, just as we have always respected America.
Zelensky has sent a letter to Trump to communicate this stance.
The letter reads, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible.
Everyone, including Ukraine's top brass, agreed that American backing is crucial for Kyiv, and halt of the aid is a serious blow. But with both sides seemingly eager to strike a deal, the world will be observing how it will play out.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. The aid deliveries halted at a pre-dawn hour, 3:30 a.m. for those who love to track time zones, might feel like an ominous signal, especially given the backdrop of last week's extraordinary clash between President Trump and President Zelensky. The move suspends any further drawdown from a hefty $3.85 billion military aid package, one that, by the way, has passed through the hands of both Biden and Trump. Now, let's examine what this means on the ground. For much of the war, Ukraine has depended on a steady stream of US military supplies. However, times have changed. Ukraine is no longer a nation whose survival hinges solely on American deliveries of artillery shells and precision weapons. Instead, Kyiv has diversified its arsenal, embracing domestically produced drones and alternative weaponry. Yet, as military analyst Michael Kaufman aptly put it, this pause is pretty significant, especially when it comes to high-end air defenses and those ever-critical precision strike systems. Imagine trying to fend off regular Russian missile attacks with a dwindling stock of sophisticated air defense systems. Ukraine's reliance on the US Patriot system as its sole bulwark against ballistic missile threats now hangs in a delicate balance. And while Ukraine's shift to drones has dramatically changed the battlefield dynamics, there remains a nagging question: when the reserves of those vital 155mm artillery shells are going to begin to deplete? And if so, what then? It's a ticking clock that might not sound off for a few months, but when it does, the silence could be deafening. Meanwhile, in the grand theater of international military donations, the United States stands as Ukraine's single largest benefactor, having delivered over $67 billion worth of support since the war began. But one thing is certain: this new pause will not collapse Ukraine's defensive lines overnight. However, it certainly sends a chill down the spine of military strategists who know that inventories, however robust today, are finite. In the intricate tapestry of modern warfare, every missed delivery, every delayed shipment is a misstep that could lead to a disastrous result when the enemy is already lurking in the wings. Now, this pause is also a diplomatic message, a subtle hint that the US might be rethinking its role on the global stage. With Washington's eyes now fixed on potential re-engagement with Russia, the pause in military aid might just be the first act in a series of deliberate disengagements. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Andreas Umland, analyst at the Swedish Institute for International Affairs. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, Trump's decision to cut all aid to Ukraine, it's been referred to as a knee-jerk reaction, a mistake, even a betrayal. But the big question is, how much of an impact will it have unless or until it is reversed?
I think one has to, first of all, see this decision in the context of a whole array of other decisions in the United Nations, in the US policy towards Canada, in the disturbances in the American-European relations. So unfortunately, this is only a symptom of a larger trend. And independently of whether this decision will be reversed or not, I think the European Union and Ukraine and also some other countries like Canada, Great Britain, Norway, Japan, Australia, and so on, they have to rethink the entire East European situation and also the general orientation of their foreign policy. So we cannot rely on the hope that this will be reversed and that perhaps soon the US will conduct again a traditional foreign policy.
So it's not going to be traditional, but is it going to be pro-Russian, as some people say?
There is the suspicion that perhaps this is all a Russian operation, and there have been references to Trump's visit to the Soviet Union in the 1980s and so on. But I don't think that this will eventually become really a pro-Russian policy, because that would be very unpopular in the US. We know from the opinion polls that Russia, and in particular Putin, are seen very critically. The Americans largely support Ukraine in this war, so this would be a very risky way to go for Trump. But currently, there are indeed certain symptoms that almost look like a pro-Russian policy. But at the end of the day, I think whatever the sources of the new U.S. foreign policy are, this reorientation of the U.S., the introversion that we now see, this sort of America First policy, is basically creating a new international system to which actors like the EU have to adapt and have to now become used to, and for instance, increase their defense efforts, their expenses for security issues. So this is a new world, independently from where this new world comes from.
So of course it has plenty of disadvantages, and we'll be coming back to the impact on Ukraine in a moment, because this decision is really hard to defend, especially given its influence and what's going on the front line. But just coming back to the European response for just a moment, wouldn't you say perhaps that some European leaders might be getting hysterical just because Trump pointed out, well, you were not spending much on defense before that. We're simply using strong arm tactics to make you do your part of the job. And some societies and some leaderships are likely to resist that, saying, yeah, but we don't deserve that. This is not the way that our relations based on trust and mutual understanding of international law is supposed to look like. But if these countries are not even complying with the 2% threshold, well, unfortunately, there seems to be a point that the US president is making that is at least partially compelling.
Yes, I mean, that is a critique that has, in my perception, become now very common, and it's justified. And I think it's now for 20 years that this should have been corrected, and the decisions in NATO have been made. One detail, interesting detail here, is that this was a decision about the 2%, where it was taken, if I correctly remember, that when Gerhard Schröder was German German Chancellor. So this is something that should have happened earlier. On the other hand, one should not forget that the current European security order was co-created by the United States. So the paradox of the current US reorientation is that it's reorienting itself, the United States, I mean, from a world order that the United States themselves have created. And that concerns not just the United Nations or NATO, but also the Helsinki Declaration of 1975, the Paris Charter of 1990, and many other things where the US has become involved and interested in European affairs, and NATO was, at the end of the day, also created largely for the defense of Europe. And now suddenly Trump is indicating that this is now all a European matter, and the US is not any longer interested. But the US
or
was
at least isn't a priority, right? They say it's not a priority. So the policy of the United States is becoming transactional, and of course, analyzing what it means would take a very long time. But for Ukraine right now, this is disastrous. Ukraine is bearing the brunt of this decision, but how long do you think is it going to take before the actual impact will be felt on the front line? And again, we're assuming that Donald Trump, speaking yesterday during the State of the Union about Ukraine being once again willing to negotiate the rare earths deal, perhaps this could lead to the suspension being lifted. So we still have time. But nevertheless, what would you say about the impact on the battlefield scenarios taking place right now?
I'm relying here on military experts who are saying that the impact will be felt in summer. So there's now currently enough kit on the front line to keep the situation stable until the summer. And then, of course, also a question would be how quickly other countries could perhaps compensate the loss of American support until summer. And I think there will be some efforts by countries, including Poland, to compensate for this. I'm also still hopeful that this can be reversed. I'm not so much here hopeful that the White House will by itself change its opinion, but that perhaps decisions like that will become scandalous and unpopular in the US, and that this will be then perhaps also seen by the White House as a domestic political risk factor, and then we may still see a reversal of this policy. I cannot imagine really that this will be something that is to the advantage of Trump. And the amounts are for the US not as high. And now we have this treaty, about the minerals and earth coming up. So maybe there will be still some correction of this particular decision.
What do you think about this treaty, by the way? Recently, J.D. Vance said that their idea was to make the U.S. invested in Ukraine, and that this would have been better than placing a couple of thousands or a couple of dozen thousands troops from European nations, because America would protect its interests. Do you think this would work? And do you think that Ukraine would be better off signing this right now, or perhaps waiting until the conditions are more clear in some way?
Well, the formulation of Vance was very unfortunate, because he sort of created this dualism between the treaty and the possible stationing of British and other European troops in Ukraine, and there was already backlash now in the British press concerning his unfortunate statement. But in general, I think in this particular case, he is actually right. I think this is a way for Ukraine to go. It shouldn't be the only investment, so to say, by the US in Ukraine. It should not be only about these minerals and earth, But I would still think it's a step in the right direction, and it's actually something that has been proposed by Ukraine itself in 2024 in Zelensky's so-called victory plan. So the idea behind it is not absurd, although the kind of juxtaposition of European help for Ukraine and American help for Ukraine is unnecessary.
One quick question,
general,
because we're running out of time. Do you think President Zelensky was right to ask for security guarantees, hard security guarantees anyway? Because these guarantees that J.D. Vance has mentioned, well, they are implicit, but they were not included in clear, unambiguous terms in that particular deal.
Yeah, I mean, the best security guarantee would obviously be a NATO membership, and that would be also, in my opinion, the only serious security guarantee in which the US is then involved via its membership in NATO. But now I think asking for it is of course right, but in a way the US has here a certain point in saying that, it's a European matter, and so the Europeans should take care of it. For me, the more important question is, does NATO still function for NATO territory? Is the US still invested in the protection of Estonia, Poland, Lithuania, Finland, Latvia, and so on? That is, to me at least, the crucial question. And I think that is what one can and should really ask of the US.
For the time being, at least, Polish leaders said following talks with White House officials that no, the US is not withdrawing its forces and that our alliance stands strong. But of course, it is our job to continue asking these questions and analyzing the situation on the ground. Andreas Umland was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thanks for having me.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko has proposed hosting peace talks in Minsk to negotiate an end to Russia's war against Ukraine. His offer follows the US decision to freeze military aid to Ukraine, a move seen as an attempt to push Kiev towards negotiations.
Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko has extended an invitation to the leaders of the United States, Ukraine and Russia to hold peace talks in Minsk aimed at ending Russia's war against Ukraine.
President of the United States.
Lukashenko's comments come in the wake of the US government's decision to freeze military aid to Ukraine, a move the White House claimed was intended to pressure Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky into negotiations. Belarus previously played host to negotiations between Ukraine, Russia and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 2014 and 2015, which resulted in the Minsk agreements. Those accords, meant to end the conflict in eastern Ukraine, were ultimately disregarded by Russia, with President Vladimir Putin declaring them void just before launching the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Although Belarus has not committed its troops to the ongoing war, it has remained one of Russia's staunchest allies, allowing Russian forces to use its territory for military operations.
Russia's civilian aviation industry is facing a severe crisis as Western sanctions cut off access to crucial aircraft components and maintenance services. With mechanical failures on the rise, Russian airlines have resorted to smuggling spare parts from the US and Europe.
Since December 2024, aviation incidents in Russia have surged, particularly for Boeing and Airbus jets, which account for two-thirds of Russia's commercial fleet. Without a steady supply of certified parts, airlines face a difficult choice: grounding aircraft, risking unsafe flights, or turning into illicit supply chains. US authorities have intensified crackdowns on smuggling operations, recently arresting 3 employees of an Ohio-based company accused of illegally exporting $2 million worth of aviation components to Russia. Meanwhile, Moscow is scrambling to develop domestic alternatives. But Russia's aircraft industry remains heavily reliant on Western technology. Even its flagship Sukhoi superjet depends on foreign-made components. The Kremlin has ambitious plans to introduce over 1,000 aircraft by 2030, but experts say production delays and technological hurdles make this goal unrealistic. With options dwindling, Russia is looking to China for assistance. While Beijing is developing its own aviation technology, experts believe it will take years before reliable replacements for Western main parts become available.
And finally, we have arrived at the East-splaining portion of our show. And this time, we're talking about Dagestan. Nestled in the North Caucasus, Dagestan stands as one of Russia's most unique and diverse republics, home to over 30 ethnic groups and dozens of languages. It is a mosaic of cultures, traditions and histories unlike anywhere else in the country. While its rich heritage and rugged mountain landscapes make it a fascinating region, Dagestan has also faced persistent challenges, from political instability to economic struggles.
For centuries, Dagestan was a crossroads of empires, from the Persian and Ottoman realms to the Russian Empire. Each influence left its mark, shaping the region's traditions, customs, and even its political landscape. Today, the Republic is home to many cultures, each maintaining strong linguistic and cultural identities. Despite Russian being the official language, many Dagestanis continue to speak their native tongues in daily life, passing them down through generations. While Dagestan's cultural richness is a source of pride, it has also faced persistent instability. The region has long struggled with political corruption, economic hardships, and the lingering effects of extremism. Following the Chechen wars in the 1990s and early 2000s, radical Islamist movements gained traction in Dagestan, leading to years of violence and counter-terrorism operations by Russian security forces. Although large-scale insurgencies have been suppressed, sporadic attacks and crackdowns continue to disrupt life in the region. Moscow maintains a firm grip on Dagestan's governance, often appointing leaders from outside the republic to ensure loyalty to the Kremlin. This has fueled resentment among locals, who see such moves as an erosion of their autonomy. Despite its strategic location on the Caspian Sea and rich natural resources, Dagestan remains one of Russia's poorest regions. High unemployment and limited opportunities have driven many young Dagestanis to seek work in other parts of Russia, mainly in Moscow and St. Petersburg.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Bye for now.